The gunshot split the night like thunder, and Caleb Archer hit the ground screaming, not from a bullet, but from ghosts only he could see. The war had ended 3 years ago, but for him, it never stopped. Red Mesa called him crazy, dangerous, the mad cowboy who couldn't tell yesterday from today. But when a fearless widow walked onto his dying ranch and refused to leave, everything changed. This is a story about broken souls, second chances, and the courage it takes to face your demons when the whole world has given up on you. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. The Texas prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of wild grass that turned gold under the relentless sun and silver beneath the moon. It was beautiful in its vastness, terrible in its isolation. Out here, a man could disappear into the landscape and never be found. Some men chose that fate. Others had it chosen for them. Caleb Archer was one of the latter. His ranch sat at the bleeding edge of Red Mesa's territory, where civilization gave way to wilderness, where the law became a suggestion and survival became everything. The cabin looked like it was surrendering to the earth, roof sagging, walls weathered gray, windows dark as empty eye sockets. The fences that once corralled horses now hung broken and useless, wire coiled in the dirt like dead snakes. Nobody from town came out here anymore. Not since the incident at Morrison's General Store 6 months back, when Caleb had thrown himself behind a stack of flour sacks because someone dropped a crate of bottles. The crash had sounded like artillery fire in his mind, and suddenly he wasn't in Red Mesa anymore. He was back in the valley where his cavalry unit had been ambushed, where the screaming of horses mixed with the screaming of men until you couldn't tell which was which. They'd found him an hour later, curled beneath the store's back stairwell, muttering coordinates to soldiers who weren't there. After that, the whispers started. Mad cowboy. Lost his mind in the war. Dangerous, probably. Best to leave him alone. The cruelty of small towns isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. The way conversations stop when you enter a room. The way eyes slide away from yours. The way helping hands suddenly have other places to be. Red Mesa hadn't run Caleb out with torches and pitchforks. They'd done something worse. They'd forgotten he existed. All except one person. Lydia Carter stood in the middle of Main Street on a Wednesday morning, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her dress simple and worn but clean. At 25, she'd already buried a husband. Typhoid had taken Samuel 2 years ago, swift and merciless as a prairie fire. Grief had carved something hard and bright into her, like a stone polished by a river until it could cut glass. She was tired of being treated like fragile china. "I'll do it," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the town council meeting that had spilled out onto the street. Mayor Hutchins looked at her like she'd offered to juggle rattlesnakes. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, you don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Lydia's green eyes didn't blink. "Caleb Archer needs help. His ranch is falling apart. Someone needs to check on him, make sure he's eating, see if he needs medical attention. I'm volunteering." "That man is unstable," Marshal Brennan said, shifting his considerable weight from one foot to the other. "Could be dangerous." "Could be," Lydia agreed. "Or could be he's just a man who went to war for this country and came back broken, and now everyone's too scared to help him." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into uncomfortable silence. "My husband died in our bed with me holding his hand," Lydia continued, her voice steady as bedrock. "I've seen the worst thing I'm ever going to see. I'm not afraid of Caleb Archer." Mrs. Morrison, the storekeeper's wife, clutched her shawl tighter. "It's not proper, dear. A young widow, alone with a man like that. People will talk." "People are already talking." Lydia's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "About him, about me. I've stopped caring what people say. Question is, does this town actually want to help one of its own, or are we just going to let him die out there because it's easier than being uncomfortable?" Nobody had an answer to that. 3 days later, Lydia loaded a wagon with supplies: flour, coffee, salt pork, beans, a few medical supplies from Doc Winters, and her own bedroll and belongings. She wasn't planning on making daily trips. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. "You're really going through with this?" Doc Winters asked, watching her secure the load. "I am." "You might not want your help." Then he can tell me himself. The old doctor studied her for a long moment, then handed her a small leather case. Laudanum. In case he has night terrors, just a few drops in water. And Lydia? He waited until she met his eyes. If he becomes violent, you leave. Immediately. Don't be a hero. I won't be a hero, Lydia said, climbing onto the wagon seat. I'll just be decent. Someone in this town ought to try it. The ride out to the Archer Ranch took 2 hours, following a road that became less of a road with every mile. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals in lazy spirals. The vastness of the land pressed down on her, immense and indifferent. Lydia had been born in St. Louis, raised with manners and piano lessons and ideas about what a lady should be. Then she'd married Samuel and followed him west, where the rules were different and survival mattered more than society. The frontier had a way of burning off everything unnecessary, leaving only what was essential. She liked who she'd become out here, hard when she needed to be, soft when she chose to be, and never, ever helpless. The Archer Ranch appeared on the horizon like a shipwreck emerging from fog. As she drew closer, the full extent of its decay became clear. The barn doors hung crooked. The corral fence leaned at dangerous angles. Weeds choked what might have once been a garden. The windmill stood motionless, its blades locked in place by rust and neglect. The cabin itself looked haunted. Lydia pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard and sat for a moment, listening. No sound except the wind whispering through broken boards. No smoke from the chimney, despite the chill in the air. No sign of life at all. She climbed down, her boots crunching on ground that desperately needed rain. "Mr. Archer," she called out. "My name is Lydia Carter. I'm from Red Mesa. I've brought some supplies." Nothing. She tried again, louder. "Mr. Archer? I don't mean any harm, just want to help if I can." Still nothing. Lydia approached the cabin door, which hung slightly ajar. She knocked firmly. "I'm coming in," she announced, giving him fair warning. "I have food and medicine. If you want me to leave, you'll have to tell me yourself." She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Not terrible, not the smell of death, but the stale, heavy odor of a space that hadn't seen fresh air or sunlight in far too long. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. The cabin was a single room with a sleeping area partitioned by a tattered curtain, a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a table with one chair, and not much else. At first, she thought the cabin was empty. Then she saw him. Caleb Archer sat in the far corner on the floor, knees drawn up, back pressed against the wall. He was so still he seemed like part of the shadows. His hair was long and unkempt, dark with threads of early gray. A beard covered half his face. His clothes were worn and dirty, but his eyes were what stopped her breath. They were the eyes of someone watching something no one else could see, wide and haunted and utterly elsewhere. "Mr. Archer?" Lydia kept her voice gentle but firm. "My name is Lydia Carter." No response. He didn't even seem to hear her. She stood there for a long moment, considering her options. She could leave, tell the town she'd tried, let whatever was going to happen happen. That would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. But Lydia Carter hadn't driven 2 hours into the wilderness to be sensible. "Well," she said, speaking more to herself than to him, "first things first." She propped the door open with a rock, flooding the cabin with afternoon light. Caleb flinched, but didn't move from his corner. She opened the single window, fighting with a frame swollen from disuse, until it finally gave way. Fresh air poured in like a blessing, then she went to work. She found the stove cold, filled with old ash. She cleaned it out, built a new fire with kindling from the wagon, and soon had flames crackling steadily. The coffee pot was filthy. She took it outside, scrubbed it with sand and water from her canteen, then put fresh coffee on to boil. The smell of coffee began to fill the cabin. Caleb's eyes moved, just slightly, just enough for her to know he was aware of her, even if he couldn't respond. "I'm going to keep talking," Lydia said, sweeping the floor with a broom she'd brought. "You don't have to answer, but I figure silence gets heavy after a while, so I'll fill it up with words." She talked about the weather, about the town, about small, meaningless things that required no response. She moved efficiently through the space, cleaning without judgment, organizing without criticism. She found a plate, the only clean one, and filled it with bread and salt pork from her supplies. "I'm putting food here on the table," she said, setting it down. Coffee too when it's ready. You can eat or not eat, your choice. She didn't expect him to move. So when his hand slowly reached out from the shadows, she had to hide her surprise. His fingers were shaking as they closed around the bread. He ate like someone who'd forgotten how, mechanically, without pleasure or awareness. But he ate. Lydia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the cabin looked different. Not fixed, nothing was fixed, but less like a tomb. Less like a place where hope went to die. Lydia had cleaned, organized, and unpacked enough supplies to last a few weeks. She'd made a simple meal of beans and cornbread. She'd found blankets that smelled like mildew and hung them outside to air. She'd worked steadily, purposefully, never asking Caleb for anything, never demanding his attention or gratitude. As darkness fell, she lit the oil lamp on the table. Caleb had moved slightly, still in his corner but sitting more upright now, watching her with those haunted eyes. I'm going to sleep in the barn tonight, Lydia said, gathering her bedroll. I'll be back in the morning to make breakfast. If you want me to leave permanently, you'll need to tell me. Otherwise, I'm staying until we get this place functioning again. She paused at the door, looking back at the broken man in the corner. You're not alone anymore, Mr. Archer, whether you want to be or not. Then she walked out into the cool night air, leaving him with light and warmth and the strange, uncomfortable gift of someone who refused to abandon him. The barn was in marginally better shape than the cabin. At least the roof didn't leak much. Lydia made a nest in the hayloft, listening to the sounds of the prairie at night. Wind through grass, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the dark. She didn't sleep well. Every sound made her tense, wondering if Caleb would come out, wondering if she'd misread the situation entirely, wondering if Doc Winters had been right and she was being reckless rather than brave. But nothing happened. When dawn broke, pale and pink across the endless sky, she climbed down from the loft and walked back to the cabin. The door was still open. The lamp had burned out. And Caleb was exactly where she'd left him, curled in his corner like a wounded animal. But the plate was empty. The coffee was gone. It was a start. Good morning, Lydia said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. I'm going to make breakfast, then I'm going to start on those fences. She worked through the morning, falling into a rhythm. Cook, clean, organize. Small tasks that added up to something larger. Small victories against the entropy that had consumed this place. Around midday, she went outside to assess the damage to the corral fence. It was worse than she'd thought. Posts rotted through, wire rusted and broken, entire sections collapsed. She'd need help to fix it properly, but she could at least start clearing away the wreckage. She was struggling with a particularly heavy post, trying to drag it clear, when a shadow fell across the ground beside her. She looked up. Caleb Archer stood in the sunlight, blinking as if he'd emerged from a cave. He was taller than she'd expected, lean in the way of men who forget to eat. His face was weathered beyond his years. She guessed he was maybe 30, but he could have been older. The war had a way of aging people. He didn't speak, but he reached down and grabbed the other end of the post. Together, they lifted it. For a moment, they stood there holding opposite ends of a rotted fence post, two strangers bound by a task too heavy for one person alone. Lydia felt something shift in the air between them. Not friendship, not yet, but acknowledgement. Recognition of shared burden. They carried the post to the burn pile in silence. Then Caleb walked back to the fence and started working on the next broken section. Still without words, still moving like someone in a dream, but moving nonetheless. Lydia picked up her tools and joined him. They worked through the afternoon, the sun bearing down mercilessly. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her hands blistered and bled. She'd done hard work before. The frontier didn't allow for delicate sensibilities. But this was brutal. Caleb worked with mechanical efficiency, never stopping, never slowing, as if the physical labor was the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. Maybe it was. When the sun finally began its descent, they'd cleared away most of the broken sections and identified which posts could be salvaged and which needed replacing. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Lydia stood up, pressing her hands to her aching back. That's enough for today, she said. I'll make supper. Caleb looked at her for the first time since they'd started working. Really looked at her. His eyes were blue, she realized. Blue like deep water. And behind all the pain and confusion, there was something else, a flicker of awareness, of presence. Why? He said. His voice was rough from disuse, barely more than a whisper. Why what? Why are you here? Lydia considered the question. She could give him easy answers. Charity, Christian duty, boredom. But this man deserved the truth, even if the truth was complicated. Because everyone deserves someone who shows up, she said finally. And because I know what it's like to be so buried in grief that you forget how to live. After my husband died, I spent 6 months in a dark room, wishing I could follow him. But I couldn't, so eventually I had to figure out how to keep breathing. I'm still figuring it out. Something changed in Caleb's expression. The walls didn't come down. They were too thick, too well built from years of trauma. But maybe a window opened, just a crack. I'm not good company, he said. Good. I'm not here for company. I'm here to work. The corner of his mouth might have twitched. It might have been the ghost of a smile or just a muscle spasm, but it was something. He nodded once, then walked back to the cabin. That night, when Lydia brought in the evening meal, she found Caleb sitting at the table instead of in his corner. It was a small thing, a trivial thing, maybe, but it felt monumental. He ate slowly, methodically, staring at his plate. She sat across from him, eating her own meal, not forcing conversation, just sharing space. Town thinks I'm crazy, Caleb said suddenly. Lydia didn't deny it. Town thinks a lot of things, most of them wrong. Might not be wrong about this. Are you dangerous? He considered the question seriously. Not to you, to myself, maybe, to ghosts. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I see things that aren't there, hear things. Sometimes I don't know where I am, what year it is. Sometimes I'm back there, in the valley, watching my men die. The war. The war. He said it like a curse. We were supposed to be heroes. We were supposed to come home and everything would be normal. But there's no normal anymore. There's just before and after, and I'm stuck in the after trying to remember how the before felt. Lydia set down her fork. My husband used to have nightmares. Toward the end, when the fever was high, he'd scream and thrash and not recognize me. It terrified me. But it didn't make him less human. It didn't make him less worthy of care. That was illness. This is, Caleb gestured vaguely at his own head. This is broken, permanent. Maybe, or maybe it just takes longer to heal than a broken bone. Maybe you need time and help and someone willing to be patient. You don't know me. No, Lydia agreed, but I know what giving up looks like. And I know that you lifted that fence post today instead of staying in your corner. That's not giving up. That's fighting. Caleb stared at her, and for the first time she saw something other than ghosts in his eyes. She saw a man desperately trying to find his way back from hell. I don't know if I can do this, he said quietly. Do what? Come back. Be normal. Then don't, Lydia said. Be whatever you are. Just don't be alone. They sat in silence as the lamp flickered and the night deepened around the cabin. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, dark and vast and indifferent. But inside this small circle of light, two broken people sat across from each other, not fixed, not whole, but no longer facing the darkness alone. It was, Lydia thought, enough for one day. The next week unfolded in a pattern. Work, meals, silence punctuated by brief exchanges, and slow, painful progress. Caleb remained fragile. Some mornings she'd find him back in his corner, unreachable, lost in whatever hell his mind had dragged him to. Other days he'd be outside before she woke, already working, channeling his demons into physical labor. Lydia learned not to push. She learned to read the signs, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands would shake, the sudden blank look that meant he'd slipped away from the present. When those moments came, she'd keep working nearby, steady and present. A lighthouse in his storm. The ranch slowly began to remember what it had been. Fences got mended piece by piece. The barn doors were rehung. The windmill, after hours of work and considerable cursing from Lydia, turned again, creaking and groaning but functional. Water flowed into the trough for the first time in months. They fell into an unspoken partnership. Caleb did the heavy lifting, the tasks that required strength and endurance. Lydia managed everything else, cooking, planning, organizing, and keeping them both moving forward. They worked well together, two people who understood that survival sometimes meant just getting through the next hour. On the 8th day, riders appeared on the horizon. Lydia saw them first, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 3 men on horseback, moving at an easy pace. Her stomach tightened. Nothing good came from unexpected visitors this far from town. Caleb had seen them too. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his hands begin to shake. He took a step backward toward the cabin, toward whatever dark corner his mind was telling him to hide in. "Stay," Lydia said firmly. "Please, just stay." The riders drew closer. She recognized them now, Tommy Richardson and the Fletcher brothers, young men with too much time and not enough sense. Town troublemakers who thought cruelty was entertainment. They reined in their horses at the edge of the yard, grinning like wolves who'd found wounded prey. "Well, well," Tommy said, his smile sharp and mean. "Heard the mad cowboy had himself a new keeper. Didn't believe it till now." "Mrs. Carter," Jake Fletcher tipped his hat in mock courtesy. "Awful brave of you, tending to the local lunatic, or awful stupid. Haven't decided which." Lydia felt rage bloom in her chest, bright and hot, but she kept her voice level. "You boys lost. Town's 2 hours that way." "We're not lost," Tommy said. "Just wanted to see if the stories were true. They say he talks to ghosts, throw fits like a child. That true, Archer? You gonna show us the crazy?" Caleb stood frozen, his entire body rigid. Lydia could see him struggling, fighting to stay present, to not give these jackals what they wanted. "You need to leave," Lydia said, stepping forward to place herself between Caleb and the riders. "Now." "Or what?" Jake laughed. "You gonna protect him, widow woman? This is between us and the cowboy. We just want to see if he's as broken as they say." "Yeah," Tommy leaned forward in his saddle. "Come on, Archer, give us a show. Talk to some of them dead soldiers you're always seeing. Maybe cry a little. That's what crazy people do, right? They cry and scream and Enough!" Lydia's voice cut through the mockery like a blade. The riders actually flinched. "You want to know what I see?" Lydia said, her words sharp and cold as January ice. "I see 3 cowards who never had the guts to fight in a real war, mocking a man who served this country while you were safe at home. I see boys playing at being men and doing a poor job of it." "Now wait just a—" Jake started. "I'm not finished." Lydia's green eyes blazed. Caleb Archer rode with the 3rd Cavalry. He fought at Wildcat Ridge and Cold River Canyon. He watched his friends die and still kept fighting because that's what soldiers do. "What did you do? Drink your father's whiskey and chase saloon girls?" The smiles had vanished from the riders' faces. "You want to judge him?" Lydia continued. "Fine. But first, go fight a war. Watch people you love get shot to pieces. Live with the screaming in your head every night. Then come back and tell me how stable you are." "We were just having some fun," Tommy muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. "Fun?" Lydia's laugh was bitter. "Your fun is his nightmare. And you know what? That makes you worse than broken. That makes you cruel. Now get off this property before I get the rifle." "You wouldn't—" "Try me." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tommy yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal around. "Come on," he said to the Fletcher brothers. "Not worth it." They rode off, slower than they'd arrived, not looking back. Lydia stood watching until they disappeared over the rise, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fury. Then she turned to check on Caleb. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or something deeper. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did." "They'll talk. Make it worse for you in town." "Let them talk." Lydia's hands were still trembling. "I'm tired of this world rewarding cruelty and punishing kindness. Someone had to say something." Caleb took a step toward her, then another. Up close, she could see the muscles working in his jaw, the way he was fighting to form words. "No one's ever—" He stopped, started again. "Thank you." "You're welcome." They stood there in the yard, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, the prairie wind whispering around them. Something had shifted between them, something fundamental. It wasn't romance, wasn't attraction. It was something rarer, recognition. 2 people seeing each other clearly, scars and all, and choosing to stand together anyway. "I'll finish the north fence tomorrow," Caleb said, finally. "I'll help." He nodded, then went back to work, his movements a little steadier than before. That night, for the first time since Lydia had arrived, Caleb ate dinner at the table without being asked. And when she said goodnight and headed to the barn, she heard him speak from behind her. Lydia? She turned. It was the first time he'd used her name. Yeah? You can stay in the cabin. Take the bed. I'll sleep out here by the stove. It's not proper, you sleeping in the barn. Lydia smiled. Thank you, Caleb. But I'm fine where I am. The barn suits me. She meant it. The barn had become her refuge, her space where she could let down her own walls and breathe without having to be strong. But the offer mattered. It meant he was thinking beyond his own survival, considering her comfort. It meant he was coming back. As she settled into her hay nest that night, listening to the familiar sounds of the prairie darkness, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the bright, naive hope of youth, but the harder, more resilient hope of someone who'd walked through fire and found they could still stand. The ranch was still broken. Caleb was still haunted. She was still grieving. But they were here, they were working, they were surviving, and sometimes that was everything. The confrontation with the riders changed something in the rhythm of their days. Caleb emerged from the cabin earlier each morning, as if sleeping had become even more difficult than working. Lydia would wake to find him already at some task, chopping wood, hauling water, repairing whatever piece of the ranch demanded attention. She learned to read his moods in the way he swung an axe, or the tension in his shoulders when he hammered nails into stubborn wood. The second week bled into the third, and the work continued without fanfare or celebration. The garden plot behind the cabin had been nothing but weeds and rocks when Lydia arrived. Now, working in the early morning coolness before the sun turned vicious, she broke up the hardened earth with a rusted hoe, her hands blistering despite the gloves she wore. The soil was better than she'd expected, dark and rich beneath the neglect, hungry for attention. Caleb appeared beside her one morning, carrying a spade she didn't know existed. He said nothing, just started turning soil in the row adjacent to hers. They worked in parallel, the only sounds their breathing and the chunk of metal biting earth. When they finished, sweat-soaked and dirt-streaked, they'd cleared a plot 20 feet square. "What will you plant?" Caleb asked, leaning on the spade. "Beans, squash. Maybe some corn if the season's not too far gone." Lydia wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "Tomatoes, definitely. And herbs, sage, thyme, whatever seeds I can get from town." "Town." Caleb's expression darkened. "You need to go back?" "Eventually. We're running low on flour and salt, a few other things." She studied his face. "I could wait another week if you need me to." "No." He shook his head. "You should go. Get what you need. I'll be all right." Lydia wasn't sure she believed him, but she also knew he needed to prove it to himself. "I'll go tomorrow then. Be back before sunset." That night, as she prepared a simple stew of salt pork and beans, Caleb sat at the table cleaning an old revolver she'd found in a trunk. His movements were methodical, practiced, the motions of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. "You know how to shoot?" he asked without looking up. "Well enough." "Samuel taught me." Lydia stirred the pot. "Why?" "You should carry this when you go to town." He set the cleaned weapon on the table. "Just in case." "In case of what?" "In case those boys decide they're not done with their fun." The thought had crossed Lydia's mind, but hearing Caleb voice it made it more real. She nodded. "All right." "Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "What you said to them. About me serving. About the cavalry." He paused, struggling with words. "How did you know?" "Doc Winters mentioned it. Said you rode with the 3rd, came back 3 years ago." She pulled the pot from the heat. "Was he wrong?" "No, he was right." Caleb's hand stilled on the gun. I didn't think anyone remembered, or cared." "Someone always remembers." Lydia ladled stew into bowls. "The question is whether they use that memory to build people up or tear them down." They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less empty, more like two people content to exist in the same space without needing to fill it with noise. The next morning, Lydia loaded the wagon with items to trade and the short list of supplies she needed. Caleb helped her hitch the horse, a sturdy mare named Bella that had emerged from the pasture one day, apparently having belonged to the ranch all along, just ranging free during the months of neglect. "You'll be all right?" Lydia asked, checking the harness one more time. "I'll be fine." Caleb handed her the revolver, wrapped in oilcloth. "Just come back." The way he said it, "come back,"
made it sound less like a request and more like a lifeline.
She tucked the gun under the wagon seat and climbed up. "I'll be back before dark," she promised. The ride to Red Mesa felt longer than usual, as if the distance had stretched during her absence. The town appeared on the horizon shimmering in heat waves, looking smaller than she remembered. Lydia drove the wagon down Main Street, acutely aware of the stares that followed her progress. She pulled up in front of Morrison's general store and climbed down, trying to ignore the knot of women gathered across the street, their whispers carrying like the buzz of wasps. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and tobacco and new fabric. Mrs. Morrison looked up from the counter, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Carter, we wondered if you'd be coming back." "Just need supplies, Mrs. Morrison. Flour, salt, a few other items." Lydia pulled out her list. "And if you have any vegetable seeds left from spring, I'll take those too." The older woman studied her.
"You're really staying out there, but with him?" "I'm helping a neighbor, same as anyone would do." Mrs. Morrison pulled down a sack of flour. "That's not what some folks are saying." "Then some folks need to find better ways to spend their time." The bell above the door jangled and Marshall Brennan walked in, his bulk seeming to fill the small space. He nodded to Mrs. Morrison, then turned to Lydia. "Mrs. Carter, glad you're back in town. Been meaning to talk to you." Lydia kept her voice even. "About what, Marshall?" "About the Archer situation." He shifted his weight. "Got a complaint from the Richardson boy. Says you threatened him and his friends." "Did he mention why?" "Said they were just checking on Archer, making sure everything was all right out there, and you ran them off with threats of violence." Lydia set down a can of peaches she'd been examining. "That's one version.
Here's mine. 3 young men rode onto private property to harass a war veteran, mocking him for injuries he sustained serving this country. I asked them to leave. They left. End of story." Marshall Brennan rubbed his jaw. "Tommy says you threatened to shoot them." "I said I'd get the rifle if they didn't leave, which I would have. Property rights being what they are, I believe that was within my rights." "It's a delicate situation, Mrs. Carter." "What's delicate about it?" Lydia's patience was wearing thin. "A man needs help. I'm helping him. That's not delicate, Marshall. That's just decent. People are worried. People are gossiping." She cut him off. "There's a difference. Now, unless you're planning to arrest me for the crime of compassion, I have shopping to finish." The marshal's face reddened, but he stepped back. "Just keep in mind that you're putting yourself in a potentially dangerous situation. If something happens, then I'll deal with it." Lydia turned back to Mrs. Morrison. "I'll also need coffee, beans, and whatever vegetables you have that are still good." She completed her shopping in tense silence, paid from the small amount of money she'd saved, and loaded everything into the wagon. As she prepared to leave, Doc Winters emerged from his office across the street and walked over. "How is he, Walt?" the doctor asked quietly. "Better. Working. Talking some." Lydia adjusted the reins. "Still has bad days, but they're getting less frequent." "And you? How are you holding up?" The question surprised her. In all her time in Red Mesa, few people had thought to ask how she was doing. "I'm fine, Doc. Tired, but fine." "You need to take care of yourself too, Lydia. Can't pour from an empty cup." "I know." She managed a smile. "But it feels good to have purpose again. To be useful." Doc Winters nodded. "Just remember, you can't save everyone. Sometimes the best we can do is stand witness." "I'm not trying to save him," Lydia said. "I'm just trying to stand with him. There's a difference." She drove out of town, feeling the weight of judgment lift with every mile. By the time the Archer Ranch came into view, her shoulders had relaxed, and she could breathe fully again. She was surprised to realize that this broken-down homestead felt more like home than Red Mesa ever had. Caleb was working on the barn when she returned, reinforcing a weak section of wall. He looked up at the sound of the wagon, and something in his expression eased when he saw her. "Any trouble?" he asked, walking over to help unload. "Nothing I couldn't handle." She decided not to mention the marshal. "Got everything we needed, and then some. Mrs. Morrison threw in extra beans. I think she feels guilty." "Good. She should." Caleb grabbed a sack of flour. "People should feel guilty when they turn their backs on their own." They carried the supplies inside, working with the easy coordination they'd developed. When everything was stored, Lydia pulled out a small packet. "Tomato seeds and squash and these?" She showed him a handful of seed packets. The woman at the store said they're for flowers, wildflowers that grow easy in this soil. Thought they might be nice around the cabin. Caleb stared at the seed packets like they were foreign objects. Flowers? Even broken places deserve beauty, Caleb. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, they do. Over the next few days, they planted the garden with methodical care. Caleb dug the rows while Lydia followed behind, placing seeds at precise intervals and covering them gently with soil. They worked in the relative coolness of early morning and late afternoon, avoiding the brutal midday heat that turned the prairie into an oven. My mother had a garden, Caleb said one afternoon, surprising Lydia with the revelation. Back in Missouri, before the war. She could make anything grow. Used to say that tending plants was like tending hope. You put something small in the ground and trust it to become something bigger. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. His voice went distant. She died while I was away. Cholera outbreak. I got the letter 3 months after she was buried. Just another piece of paper telling me someone else was gone. Lydia set down her trowel. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring anyone back. He jabbed the spade into the earth harder than necessary. You know what the worst part is? I can barely remember her face now. It's like the war burned everything out of me, even the good memories. All I have left is the bad. That's not true. How would you know? Because you just told me about her garden, Lydia said gently. That's a good memory. It's still there, Caleb, just buried under the bad ones. Maybe it takes work to dig it back up. He looked at her with those haunted blue eyes. You make it sound simple. I don't mean to. Nothing about this is simple. She returned to planting, giving him space. But maybe that's the point. Maybe healing isn't about forgetting the bad things. Maybe it's about remembering that good things existed too. Caleb didn't respond, but he kept working, and Lydia took that as answer enough. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, they sat on the cabin's front step, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. The garden was planted, the rows neat and promising. In a few weeks, if the weather held, they'd see the first shoots pushing through the soil. Tell me about your husband, Caleb said suddenly. Lydia was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question. Samuel was good, kind, patient with my temper, which is more than most men would be. She smiled at the memory. He had dreams of building something out here. A real ranch, cattle, horses. He wanted to prove that the frontier wasn't just for rough men. That you could build a life with gentleness and still survive. Did he? Survive? No. But he built a life while he had time. That counts for something. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. He used to say that every day you wake up is a day you get to choose who you are. Doesn't matter who you were yesterday. You get to choose again. I wish I believed that. You don't have to believe it. Just do it. Choose one thing, one small thing that's different from yesterday. Do that enough times, and eventually you look back and realize you're not the same person you were. Caleb considered this. What did you choose after he died? To get out of bed. That was day one. Just get out of bed. Lydia's voice was steady, matter of fact. Day 2, get dressed. Day 3, walk outside. Baby steps, Caleb. That's all any of us can do. And which day did you choose to come help the town crazy? The day I got tired of being afraid. She met his eyes. Fear makes you small. I was done being small. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. The prairie night sounds rose around them, crickets singing, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through grass. I used to love nights like this, Caleb said quietly, before the war. Used to sleep under the stars whenever I could, just me and my horse and the whole sky above. Felt free. What changed? Night ambushes, attacks that came when you couldn't see them coming, lost half my unit one night. We were camped in a valley, thought we had sentries posted properly. They hit us from 3 sides before we even knew they were there. His hands clenched. Now darkness just feels like something waiting to swallow me. But you're sitting here, Lydia pointed out, under the stars. Right now. Caleb blinked, as if realizing it for the first time. Yeah, I am. Maybe that's today's choice, sitting outside after dark. Maybe. A pause. It's easier with you here. Good. That's what I'm here for. They remained on the step until the chill drove them inside, and when Lydia said goodnight and headed to the barn, she carried with her the warmth of small victories. Caleb was still broken. The ranch was still a work in progress, but tonight he'd sat under the stars and remembered, however briefly, what it felt like to not be afraid. The following week brought a stretch of clear weather, perfect for the hard work that remained. They tackled the barn's sagging roof, Lydia holding boards while Caleb hammered them into place. The physical demands of the work left little room for conversation, but the silence between them had become comfortable, even companionable. On the fifth day, while they were taking a water break in the barn's shade, Caleb spoke up. I need to tell you something. His voice was tight. About why I'm like this. Why the town thinks I'm mad. Lydia set down her water cup. You don't have to. I want to. He stared at his hands. You should know what you're dealing with. She waited, giving him time. It's not just memories, Caleb began. It's like, sometimes I'm there and here at the same time. I'll be doing something normal, chopping wood, whatever, and suddenly I'm back in that valley. I can smell the smoke, hear the screaming, see the faces of men I couldn't save. It's not a memory, it's real. As real as you sitting here right now. Flashbacks, Lydia said quietly. Is that what they're called? Caleb laughed bitterly. Doc Winters mentioned that word once, made it sound clinical, safe, like it's just something that happens in your head that you can ignore. But you can't ignore it when you're convinced the barn is on fire and your men are trapped inside. You can't ignore it when you hit the ground because a dropped bucket sounded like cannon fire. That's what happened at Morrison's store. Yeah. He rubbed his face. I was buying supplies. Someone dropped a crate. Next thing I knew, I was under the stairs back in that valley, waiting for the artillery to stop. When I came back to myself, everyone was staring at me like I was a rabid dog. They didn't understand. How could they? I don't understand it myself. His voice cracked. I'm afraid all the time, Lydia. Afraid of loud noises. Afraid of crowds. Afraid of my own mind. What kind of man is afraid of everything? A man who survived hell. Lydia moved closer. Fear isn't weakness, Caleb. It's proof you're still alive. Dead men don't fear anything. Sometimes I wish I was dead. Would be easier. The words hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. Easier for who? Lydia asked. Not for me. I'd have no one to help me fix this damn roof. Despite everything, Caleb's mouth twitched. That's why you want me alive? For manual labor? Partly. Also, I make too much food for one person. Someone needs to eat it. Practical reasons. Always. She picked up her water cup again. Look, I won't pretend to understand what you're going through. I've never been to war, never seen what you've seen, but I know about wanting to give up. I know about days when breathing feels like too much effort. And I know that sometimes the only thing that keeps you going is someone else needing you to keep going. That's a lot of pressure to put on another person. Maybe. But right now, today, you're here, you're talking to me, you're working on this barn. That's enough. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. You're a strange woman, Lydia Carter. I'll take that as a compliment. They returned to work, and though Caleb still carried the weight of his confession, his movement seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had made it marginally easier to bear. That night, Lydia was awakened by sounds from the cabin. She lay in the hayloft, listening, shouting, Caleb's voice, thick with terror, calling out names she didn't recognize. Commands barked at soldiers who weren't there. She climbed down from the loft and approached the cabin cautiously. Through the window, she could see Caleb thrashing in his bedroll by the stove, caught in the grip of a nightmare. She debated whether to wake him, Doc Winters had warned her that could be dangerous, or to let it run its course. The decision was made for her when Caleb jerked upright, gasping, his eyes wide and unseen in the dim light. Lydia opened the door slowly. Caleb, she said softly, you're at the ranch. You're safe. It's just a dream. He stared at her without recognition, his chest heaving. It's Lydia, she continued, keeping her voice calm and steady. You're at home. The war is over. You're safe. Slowly, awareness crept back into his eyes. He looked around the cabin, then at her, and the realization of where he was seemed to crash over him like a wave. He dropped his head into his hands. I woke you. His voice was hoarse.
I'm sorry. Don't be. Lydia moved to the stove and added wood to the banked coals. I'll make coffee. You don't have to. I know, but I'm going to anyway. They sat in the pre-dawn darkness, drinking coffee and not talking about the nightmare. Lydia understood that sometimes words made things worse, that sometimes presence was enough. This happens most nights, Caleb finally said. The dreams. Sometimes I wake up screaming. Sometimes I don't wake up at all, just act out whatever hell my mind has conjured up. Must be exhausting. It is. He cupped his hands around the coffee mug. That's part of why I isolated myself.
Couldn't put others through this. Couldn't stand the looks, the judgment. I'm not judging. I know, that's what makes you different. He met her eyes. Why do you do this, Lydia? Really? It can't just be about helping a neighbor. There are easier causes. Lydia considered her answer carefully. After Samuel died, I spent months feeling useless. People brought me food, helped with chores, treated me like I was made of glass. I hated it, hated being the object of pity, hated feeling like I had nothing to contribute. She took a sip of coffee. When I heard about you, heard what you were going through, I saw a chance to be useful again, to help someone who actually needed it, not just because it made people feel better about themselves. So I'm your project. No, you're a person who needs help. Same as I was, same as everyone is at some point. She set down her cup. We're all just walking wounded, Caleb. Some wounds show, some don't. But we're all carrying something. He absorbed this in silence. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the deep black fading to navy blue. I should get started on the day, Caleb said, standing. Fence in the south pasture needs work. I'll make breakfast first. Lydia, he paused. Thank you for not treating me like I'm broken beyond repair. You're not broken beyond repair, you're just broken. There's a difference. She watched him gather his tools and head outside, moving into the work that kept him anchored. Through the window, she could see him walking toward the south pasture, his silhouette growing smaller against the vast prairie dawn. The days continued to unfold in their pattern of work and small progress. The south pasture fence was repaired. The garden sprouted its first green shoots, tiny and fragile but undeniably alive. The barn roof no longer leaked, small victories that added up to something larger. But the peace was fragile, and Lydia knew it. It shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when 3 horses appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Lydia was in the garden, thinning the bean plants when she spotted them. Her stomach dropped. The riders were pushing their horses hard, and that meant trouble. Caleb emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and went very still. Lydia recognized the look. He was preparing to retreat, to find a corner and hide from whatever was coming. Don't, she said, moving to stand beside him. Whatever this is, we face it together. The riders thundered into the yard, kicking up dust. They weren't the Richardson boy and his friends this time. These were grown men, hard-faced and armed. The leader, a thick-set man with a scar running down his left cheek, dismounted without being invited. You Archer? He demanded. Caleb nodded, his jaw tight. Name's Garrett. Been tracking a horse thief through this territory. Trail led here. No horse thief here, Lydia said firmly. Just us and our livestock. Garrett's eyes swept the ranch, landing on the corral where Bella stood alongside a smaller paint horse that had wandered in a few days ago, thin and skittish. Caleb had been feeding it, slowly building its trust. That paint, Garrett said, pointing. Where'd you get it? Showed up on its own, Caleb answered, half starved. I've been feeding it. That's my brother's horse, stolen 2 weeks ago from our ranch, 40 miles south. Then you're welcome to take it back, Lydia said. We're not thieves. Convenient story. Garrett's hand rested on his gun. How do I know you didn't steal it yourself? Crazy cowboy living out here alone might think he could get away with it. The word crazy hit Caleb like a physical blow. Lydia saw him flinch, saw his hands start to shake. Choose your next words carefully, Lydia said, her voice cold as winter stone. You're accusing an innocent man based on nothing but proximity and rumor. I'm accusing a man with a stolen horse in his corral. A horse that wandered here. Look at it. Does it look like it's been cared for here? It's skin and bones. We've been trying to help it. One of the other riders, younger, with nervous eyes, spoke up. That is Thunder, Garrett. Look at the marking on its left flank. But the lady's right. It looks rough. Maybe it really did just wander here. Garrett wasn't ready to back down. Maybe. Or maybe this is exactly what a thief would want us to think. The tension in the yard was thick enough to choke on. Lydia could feel Caleb trembling beside her, fighting to stay present, to not let the confrontation drag him back into memories of violence. "Here's what's going to happen," Lydia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're going to take your horse. We're going to help you load it up with some feed to get it home healthy. And then you're going to leave and tell your brother that his horse was found and returned by good people. Or," Garrett said slowly, "I could take you both in for questioning." "On what grounds? Finding a lost animal?" Lydia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Try that in front of Marshal Brennan and see how fast you become the laughingstock of the territory." The standoff stretched like pulled wire, ready to snap. Then Caleb spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Take the horse. We don't want trouble." Something in his tone, calm, measured, utterly sane, seemed to deflate Garrett's aggression. The man looked at Caleb again, really looked, and seemed to reconsider his assumptions. "All right," Garrett said finally. "We'll take Thunder and be on our way. But I'll be watching this place." "Watch all you want," Lydia said. "You won't find anything but honest work." They helped load the paint horse, which went willingly enough, recognizing its former handlers. As the riders prepared to leave, the younger man turned back. "Sorry for the accusation," he said, addressing Caleb directly. "We've been chasing this trail for days. Made us suspicious of everyone." Caleb nodded, accepting the apology without words. When the riders finally disappeared over the rise, Lydia felt the strength drain out of her legs. She sat down hard on the ground, breathing shakily. Caleb sat beside her. They stayed there in the dust, letting the adrenaline fade, neither speaking until the world felt solid again. "You stood your ground," Lydia finally said. "Didn't run, didn't break." "I wanted to." Caleb's voice was raw. "Every instinct told me to hide. But you were there, and I couldn't. I couldn't let them hurt you because of me. They weren't going to hurt me. They might have. If I'd run, if I'd acted crazy like they expected, they might have gotten rough. So I stayed." He looked at his hand, still trembling slightly. "Is this what it feels like? Choosing to be brave even when you're terrified?" "Yeah," Lydia said softly. "That's exactly what it feels like." They sat together in the yard as the afternoon sun beat down. Two people who'd faced down their fears and found themselves still standing. The ranch stretched around them, still broken in places, still healing in others, but undeniably alive. And that, Lydia thought, was something worth fighting for. The confrontation with Garrett and his men left ripples that spread through the following days like stones dropped in still water. Caleb moved through his tasks with renewed purpose, as if standing his ground had awakened something dormant inside him. He worked longer hours, pushing himself harder, and Lydia recognized the pattern. He was trying to outrun the demons that still chased him through the corridors of his mind. She didn't stop him. Sometimes the only way through fear was to exhaust yourself past the point where it could catch you. The garden was thriving now, green shoots pushing skyward with the kind of determination that only living things possessed. Lydia tended it each morning, pulling weeds and checking for insects, marveling at how something so fragile could be so persistent. Life wanted to live, she realized. You just had to give it half a chance. One evening, nearly a month after she'd first arrived, Caleb joined her in the garden. The sun was sinking low, painting everything gold and amber, and the air had finally released its stranglehold of heat. "Tell me about the war," Lydia said, surprising herself with the request. "Not the bad parts. Tell me something good that happened." Caleb's hand stilled on the tomato plant he'd been staking. "You want to hear about the war? I want to hear about you. And the war is part of you, whether you like it or not." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sat back on his heels, his gaze distant. "There was this kid in my unit, Jamie Lawson. Couldn't have been more than 17, lied about his age to enlist. Skinny thing, all elbows and knees and enthusiasm." A faint smile touched Caleb's lips. He used to write letters home to his sweetheart every single night. Didn't matter if we were in camp or on the march or sitting in a trench waiting for orders. Every night, by candlelight, he'd write to this girl named Mary. Did she write back? Every week like clockwork, sometimes twice a week. He'd read those letters over and over until they fell apart. Caleb pulled a weed absently. One night, we were camped outside a town we'd just taken. Everyone was exhausted, tense. We'd lost men that day. The mood was dark. And Jamie stands up in front of the whole company and announces that Mary said yes. To what? He'd proposed in one of his letters, asked her to marry him when he got home, and she said yes. Caleb's smile grew. He was so happy, Lydia, just absolutely radiant with it. Started planning their whole life right there, where they'd live, how many kids they'd have, what kind of farm they'd build. Got the whole camp talking about it, sharing their own dreams of home. For about an hour, we weren't soldiers. We were just men who wanted to go home and live normal lives. Did he make it back? The smile faded. Yeah. Lost an arm at Cold River Canyon, but he made it home. Last I heard, he married Mary, and they're running a farm in Ohio. 3 kids now. That's a good story. It is, but it's hard to remember the good ones when the bad ones are so loud. Caleb met her eyes. I've tried, Lydia. I've tried to hold on to the good memories, but they slip away like water through my fingers, and all I'm left with is blood and screaming and the faces of men who didn't make it home. So we'll practice, Lydia said firmly. Every day, you tell me one good thing from before or during the war, one thing that reminds you that you're more than just trauma and survival. That's asking a lot. Good. I like asking for a lot. Keeps things interesting. Despite himself, Caleb laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused and uncertain, but it was real. Lydia felt a surge of triumph at drawing it out of him. They finished tending the garden as the stars began to emerge, and when they walked back to the cabin together, something between them had shifted again. Not romance. It was too soon for that. Too fragile. But friendship. Real, solid friendship built on honesty and shared labor and the willingness to see each other clearly. That night, Lydia was awakened not by screaming but by a different sound. She lay in the hayloft listening, trying to identify it. Then she recognized it. The creak of the cabin door, footsteps moving across the yard. She climbed down quietly and peered out of the barn. Caleb stood in the middle of the yard, face tilted up to the night sky, perfectly still. For a moment she thought he was sleepwalking, lost in some nightmare. Then she heard him speak, soft words carried on the wind. I'm still here, boys. Still here. He was talking to ghosts again, but this time it sounded different, not panicked or afraid. Almost like a prayer or a promise. Lydia stayed hidden in the barn, giving him privacy. After a long while, Caleb walked back to the cabin and closed the door behind him. She returned to her nest in the hay, wondering what battle he'd fought and won in those quiet moments under the stars. The next morning dawned hot and still, the kind of oppressive heat that made every movement feel like swimming through molasses. Lydia was gathering eggs from the small coop they'd repaired when she heard hoofbeats. Just one rider this time, moving at an easy pace. Caleb emerged from the cabin, and together they watched the rider approach. As the figure drew closer, Lydia recognized Wade Holloway, an old horseman who lived on the far side of Red Mesa territory. He was weathered and lean, with hair gone completely white and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning," Wade called out, reining in his bay gelding. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Lydia said. "Can we offer you some coffee?" "Wouldn't say no to that." Wade dismounted with the ease of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. He looked at Caleb with open curiosity but no judgment. "You're Archer, right? Heard you were out this way." Caleb nodded warily. "What can we do for you, Mr. Holloway?" "Actually, I'm hoping you can help me with a problem." Wade accepted the coffee Lydia handed him. "Got a Mustang on my property that's been causing me trouble. Wild thing, won't let anyone near it, but it's got a wound on its leg that's going to turn bad if it's not treated. Heard from Garrett's brother that you had a way with a spooked horse." Lydia and Caleb exchanged glances. "What did Garrett's brother tell you?" Caleb asked carefully. "That you kept his paint horse alive when it wandered onto your land half-starved. That you didn't have to do that, but you did." Wade took a sip of coffee. "Also heard you're the fellow who fought at Wildcat Ridge, lost my son in that battle. So I figure you've earned whatever help I can offer." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Wade wasn't here just about a horse. He was here extending an olive branch, offering respect to a fellow survivor of the war's devastation. "I don't know if I can help," Caleb said quietly, "but I'll try. That's all any man can ask." They finished their coffee, and Caleb gathered a few supplies: rope, medical kit, some grain for bait. Lydia watched them prepare to leave, feeling an unexpected twist of anxiety. "I should come with you," she said. "No need," Wade assured her. "It's just a few miles out and back. We'll be home before dark." "Lydia," Caleb's voice was steady. "I'll be all right." She wanted to argue, to insist that he wasn't ready to be away from the ranch, away from the safe space they'd built. But she also knew that if he was ever going to truly heal, he needed to prove to himself that he could function beyond these boundaries. "All right," she said, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Be careful." She watched them ride away, Caleb on Bella and Wade on his bay, until they disappeared into the shimmer of heat waves on the horizon. Then she turned back to the ranch and threw herself into work, trying to keep her mind occupied. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Lydia cleaned the cabin, mended clothes, harvested vegetables from the garden, and still the sun seemed stuck in the sky, refusing to move toward evening. She found herself watching the horizon obsessively, looking for riders that didn't appear. What if Caleb had an episode out there? What if the stress of dealing with a wild horse triggered his memories? What if Wade didn't understand what was happening and thought Caleb was just crazy after all? "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "He needs to do this. You can't protect him from everything." But the worry gnawed at her nonetheless. It was late afternoon when disaster struck, but it came from an unexpected direction. Lydia was in the barn, reorganizing tools, when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The thunder of hooves, multiple animals, moving fast and panicked. She ran outside and stopped dead. A wild Mustang had burst through the newly repaired north fence, wire snapping like thread. But this wasn't the calm, wounded animal Wade had described. This was a creature in pure panic, eyes rolling white, blood streaming from gashes on its legs and flanks where it had torn through the fence. The horse wheeled in the yard, screaming its terror to the sky. Behind it, the fence lay in ruins, all their careful work destroyed in seconds. Lydia's first instinct was to run for safety, get inside and wait for the animal to leave. But she could see the severity of its wounds, could see that if left untreated, this magnificent creature would bleed out on the prairie. And more than that, she could see that it was trapped, too panicked to find the opening it had created, running in circles, hurting itself more with every frantic movement. She thought of Caleb, of how he'd faced the men with the stolen horse, even though every instinct screamed at him to hide. She thought of her own words about choosing to be brave even when terrified. This was her test. Lydia moved slowly toward the tack room, never taking her eyes off the Mustang. The animal saw her and reared, front hooves slashing the air. She froze, heart hammering, then continued her careful approach. She grabbed a rope and a bucket of grain, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped both. "Easy," she called out, her voice trembling. "Easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you." The Mustang snorted and stamped, muscles quivering under its sweat-soaked coat. It was a beautiful animal, dapple gray with a black mane and tail, but beauty didn't make it less dangerous. One kick from those powerful legs could kill her. Lydia set down the grain bucket and shook some into her hand. "Look," she said, holding it out. "Just food. That's all. Nothing scary." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice, but it didn't approach. Blood dripped steadily from its wounds, dark spots in the dust. She needed help. She needed Caleb. But Caleb wasn't here, and this animal was dying. She took another step forward, moving with exaggerated slowness. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but we're both going to be okay. We just need to trust each other for a minute." The Mustang's breathing was labored, foam flecking its mouth. It was starting to tire, the initial burst of panic-driven energy fading into exhaustion and pain. That might make it more docile, or it might make it more unpredictable. Lydia kept talking, kept moving, kept holding out the grain. Her entire body felt like a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat ran into her eyes. The Mustang watched her with one wild eye, trembling, deciding whether she was predator or salvation. "Come on," she whispered. "Please, let me help you." The horse took one step toward her, then another. Its nose stretched toward the grain in her hand, nostrils flaring to catch the scent. Lydia held perfectly still, barely breathing, as those soft lips touched her palm and took the grain delicately. For one perfect moment, they stood connected, woman and wild animal, fear and trust balanced on a knife's edge. Then something shifted. Maybe it was the wind carrying an unfamiliar scent. Maybe it was pain overriding the brief moment of calm. But the Mustang's eyes went wide again, and it reared, pulling back, the rope Lydia had been reaching for with her other hand falling uselessly to the ground. The horse wheeled and bolted, heading straight for the broken fence line, and Lydia knew with terrible certainty that if it ran in its current condition, it would die out on the prairie, alone and terrified. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. And incredibly, impossibly, the Mustang stopped. It stood at the edge of the yard, sides heaving, looking back at her as if waiting for something. Lydia's mind raced. She couldn't rope it alone, couldn't force it to stay. All she had were words and the thin thread of connection they'd established. "Don't run," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please don't run. I know you're hurt. I know you're scared. But running won't help. Stay. Just stay." The Mustang's ears swiveled, listening, its muscles bunched, ready to flee at any second. Then Lydia heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, and her heart leaped. Caleb and Wade appeared on the horizon, moving fast. They must have seen the broken fence, understood something was wrong, but their approach was spooking the Mustang. It danced sideways, preparing to bolt into the open prairie. "Caleb!" Lydia shouted. "The horse! It's wounded! We can't let it run!" She saw the moment Caleb took in the scene, the destroyed fence, the panicked animal, Lydia standing in the middle of chaos, trying to hold everything together with nothing but her voice and will. She saw him pull Bella to a halt, saw Wade do the same, both men frozen at the edge of the yard. And then she saw something change in Caleb's face. The fear that usually paralyzed him was there. She could see it in his eyes. But something else was there too. Determination. Choice. He dismounted slowly, speaking to Wade in low tones, and began to approach the Mustang from the side. "Don't look at it directly," he called to Lydia, his voice remarkably calm. "Predators stare. We're not predators. Look just past it. Move slow. Like water, not wind." Lydia adjusted her gaze, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to watch the dangerous animal carefully. She moved in the way Caleb described, fluid and unhurried, and was amazed to see the Mustang settle slightly. Caleb was closer now, approaching from a different angle, creating a gentle triangle with Lydia and the horse. Wade stayed back, understanding without being told that too many people would overwhelm the animal. "That's it," Caleb murmured, and Lydia wasn't sure if he was talking to her, or the horse, or himself. "Nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe here. You're safe." The Mustang's head lowered fractionally, its breathing slowed. Caleb was 10 feet away now, then 5, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for a man who usually flinched at loud noises. "Caleb," Lydia said quietly, "it's hurt badly, lost a lot of blood." "I know, I can see." He was close enough now to extend his hand, palm down, non-threatening. "But we're going to fix that. We're going to help. Just need you to trust us for a few minutes." The Mustang's nose touched his hand, just as it had touched Lydia's. Caleb's fingers moved slowly up to its neck, gentle as a whisper, finding the places where horses like to be touched. The animal trembled but didn't pull away. "Wade," Caleb said, not taking his eyes off the Mustang. "Bring the medical kit. Slow. And Lydia, can you get a halter from the barn?" They moved like dancers in a carefully choreographed performance, each person playing their part with precision. Lydia retrieved the halter and brought it to Caleb, who slipped it on the Mustang's head with movements so smooth they seemed inevitable. Wade approached with the medical kit, his weathered face showing deep respect for what he was witnessing. "This is going to sting," Caleb told the horse, beginning to clean the wounds. The Mustang flinched and stamped but didn't bolt. Caleb kept talking, a steady stream of reassurance and calm, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Lydia found herself mesmerized by the transformation. This was the same man who'd been curled in a corner a month ago, unable to function. Now he was completely present, completely focused, handling a dangerous situation with competence and grace. The sun had moved considerably by the time Caleb finished treating the wounds and bandaging the worst of them. The Mustang stood quietly in the corral they'd guided it to, exhausted but stable. Its breathing had normalized, and though it was still wary, the wild panic had drained away. Wade let out a low whistle. "That was something to see, Archer. Not many men could have done what you just did." Caleb wiped blood and sweat from his face, and Lydia saw his hands start to shake now that the crisis had passed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him exposed to everything he'd been holding at bay. "I need to sit down," he said,
his voice suddenly unsteady. Wade caught him under the arm as his legs buckled, helping him to the cabin. Lydia ran ahead to clear the table, to put water on for coffee, to do something useful while her own delayed reaction threatened to overwhelm her. They got Caleb inside and into a chair. His whole body was shaking now, teeth chattering despite the heat. "It's all right," Wade said, recognition in his eyes. "I've seen this before. Let it come." "I can't," Caleb gasped. "I can't breathe. There's too much. Everything is too loud." Lydia knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Look at me. Just me. Nothing else. You're here. You're safe. The horse is safe. Everyone's safe. I thought I was past this," he managed. "I thought I could—" "You did," she said firmly. "You did exactly what needed doing. This is just your body processing it. Let it happen. Don't fight it."
It took 20 minutes for the shaking to subside, for Caleb's breathing to regulate, for the world to settle back into focus for him. Wade sat quietly the whole time, asking no questions, offering no judgment, just present in the way that veterans understood other veterans. When Caleb could finally speak without gasping, he looked at Wade. "The Mustang you wanted help with?" "Was never about a Mustang," Wade said gently. "Well, it was. But that one's doing fine now. I'd heard things about you, Archer, about what the war did to you. Wanted to see for myself who you really were." He paused. "My son came back different too. Not broken like some folks said, just carrying weight he couldn't put down. Killed himself 6 months after coming home. I've always wondered if someone had just stood with him, really stood with him, if things might have been different." Caleb's eyes filled. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just keep fighting. Because what I saw out there today wasn't a broken man. That was a man who knows how to face chaos and not let it win." Wade stood, preparing to leave. "You've got good people here, Archer. Don't waste that." After Wade rode off, Lydia and Caleb sat in the cabin's dimness, exhausted beyond words. The Mustang was quiet in the corral, and the ranch lay still under the fading light. "I almost lost it out there," Caleb said finally. "When I saw that horse, saw you trying to handle it alone, I felt the panic coming. Same as always. But you didn't lose it. You chose not to. Is that what it was? Choice? What else would you call it?" Lydia leaned back against the wall. "You were afraid. You faced the fear anyway. That's the definition of courage. Didn't feel like courage, felt like terror wearing a mask." "Maybe they're the same thing," Lydia said. "Maybe courage is just terror that decided to show up anyway." They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, too tired to move, too wired to sleep. Outside, the prairie night settled in with its familiar sounds, and somewhere in the corral, a wild Mustang that should have been dead rested peacefully, testament to what could be saved when people refused to give up. "You know what scares me most?" Caleb said into the darkness. "What?" "That I'll get better. That I'll start to feel normal again, and then something will trigger me and I'll be right back where I started. That all this progress is just temporary, and the real me is still that broken man in the corner." Lydia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "What if there is no real you? What if you're just whoever you are today and tomorrow you get to choose again?" That's exhausting. Living is exhausting. Dying is easy. You've been choosing the hard path every single day since I got here. That counts for something. Does it? His voice was raw with doubt. Or am I just delaying the inevitable? There's no inevitable except death, Caleb. Everything else is choice and chaos, and making the best of what you've got. She reached over and found his hand in the darkness. You calmed a wild horse today. You saved its life. You stood in the middle of chaos and didn't break. If that's not progress, I don't know what is. His hand tightened around hers. What if I fail tomorrow? Then you try again the day after. That's all any of us can do. They remained like that, hands clasped in the darkness, two people who'd looked into the abyss and found the strength to pull each other back from the edge. The Mustang's breathing was audible from the corral, steady and strong. Tomorrow they'd have to repair the fence again, tend to the animal's wounds, face whatever new challenges arose. But tonight, they'd survived. They'd faced chaos and come through it together. And that, Lydia thought, was its own kind of victory. Morning arrived with the gentleness that felt almost apologetic after the chaos of the previous day. Lydia woke to birdsong and the soft nickering of horses, and for a moment she let herself simply exist in that peaceful space before the weight of responsibility settled back onto her shoulders. The Mustang was her first concern. She dressed quickly and made her way to the corral, half expecting to find the animal had succumbed to its injuries during the night. Instead, she found it standing calmly in the early light, head lowered as it investigated the hay Caleb must have already put out. The bandages were still in place, no fresh bleeding visible. Caleb himself was sitting on the corral fence, watching the horse with an expression that was hard to read. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes suggesting another sleepless night, but his posture was relaxed rather than tense. "How long have you been out here?" Lydia asked, climbing up to sit beside him. "Since before dawn. Couldn't sleep, figured I'd make myself useful." He gestured toward the Mustang. "Changed the dressings an hour ago. Wounds look clean. No infection yet, though we'll need to watch carefully over the next few days." "You should rest." "Can't." Caleb's voice was flat, but not bitter. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in it. The panic, the fear, easier to just stay awake." Lydia wanted to argue, to tell him he needed to take care of himself, but she'd learned that sometimes the kindest thing was to just accept where someone was at, instead of pushing them to be somewhere else. "What are you going to name it?" she asked instead. Caleb looked at her, surprised. "Name it?" "Well, we can't just keep calling it the Mustang. Seems disrespectful after what it's been through." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You name it. You're the one who stood there trying to calm it down when any sane person would have run for cover." Lydia studied the horse, taking in its dappled coat and wild spirit that even injury couldn't completely suppress. "Storm," she said finally, "because that's what it came in on, and that's what it survived." "Storm." Caleb tested the name. "I like it." They sat in companionable silence, watching Storm move carefully around the corral, favoring its injured legs but moving nonetheless. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day, and Lydia mentally cataloged all the work that needed doing: the fence repairs, tending the garden, preparing meals, caring for the injured horse. "Wade was right, you know," Caleb said suddenly, "about what he saw yesterday." "What do you mean?" "He saw someone who could function in crisis. Someone useful." Caleb turned to look at her. "I've spent 3 years thinking I was completely broken, that the war had destroyed everything I used to be and left nothing worth salvaging. But yesterday, for those minutes when Storm needed help, I wasn't broken. I was just me, doing what needed doing." "You're always you, Caleb. Broken or whole or somewhere in between. That doesn't change. But it feels different now." He struggled to articulate it. "Before, I thought healing meant going back to who I was before the war, becoming that person again. But maybe that's impossible. Maybe healing means becoming someone new who can carry what happened and still function." Lydia felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of profound truth. "I think you might be right. After Samuel died, I kept trying to be the person I was when he was alive. Kept trying to fit back into that shape. It never worked because that person doesn't exist anymore. I'm someone different now, someone who carries grief but isn't defined by it." "How long did it take to become that person?" "I'm still becoming her," Lydia admitted. "Every day, I think. It's not a destination, it's just the journey." Caleb absorbed this, his eyes distant. "The men I served with, the ones who died. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying them by trying to be happy, like I don't deserve peace when they got torn apart." "You think they'd want you to suffer?" "I don't know what they'd want. They're dead." "Then I'll tell you what they'd want." Lydia's voice was firm. "They'd want you to live, really live, not just survive. Because someone has to carry forward what they fought for, and you can't do that if you're buried in a corner wishing you were dead too." Caleb flinched at her directness, but he didn't argue. They sat watching Storm as the sun climbed higher, each lost in their own thoughts, connected by the shared understanding of what it meant to carry the weight of the past into an uncertain future. The days that followed developed their own rhythm, shaped by Storm's needs and the endless demands of the ranch. The Mustang's wounds healed slowly but steadily, and with that healing came a gradual gentling of its wild spirit. Caleb spent hours in the corral, not trying to break the animal, but rather building trust through patience and consistency. Lydia watched this process with fascination. There was something almost meditative about the way Caleb moved around Storm, never forcing, never demanding, just offering presence and care until the horse began to accept him. It occurred to her that this was exactly what she'd been doing with Caleb himself, offering presence without demands, care without conditions, patience without expectations. They were healing each other, she realized, all three of them, in their own way. A week after Storm's arrival, Wade Holloway returned. This time he brought someone with him, a younger man with similar features and the same weathered competence. "This is my nephew, Daniel," Wade said by way of introduction. "Helps me run my spread. Thought he might be useful for what I want to propose." Caleb and Lydia exchanged glances. "What kind of proposal?" Caleb asked warily. Wade dismounted, and Daniel followed suit. "I've been thinking about what I saw here last week, about what you did with that Mustang, and it occurred to me that there's a need for that kind of skill around these parts." "What do you mean?" "There's wild horses all over this territory. Some of them get hurt, get caught in wire or ravines, get separated from their herds. Most folks just shoot them or let them die because nobody has the patience or knowledge to help, but you do." Wade gestured toward the corral, where Storm stood watching the newcomers with alert interest. "I'm proposing a partnership. You gentle and heal the horses that need it. I help you sell the ones that recover. We split the profit." Lydia felt her pulse quicken. This could change everything, give Caleb real purpose, provide income for the ranch, offer him a way to contribute to the community that didn't require him to be someone he wasn't. But Caleb was shaking his head. I can't promise consistency. Some days I can barely function, Wade. I can't build a business on that." "Then don't promise consistency," Wade said calmly. "Promise best effort. Work when you can, rest when you can't. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to use the skills you have when you're able to use them." "And on the days when he can't work?" Lydia asked. "What then?" "Then the horses wait, or Daniel here helps out, or we adjust." Wade's eyes were kind but firm. "Look, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a partnership because I think you have something valuable to contribute. But I'm also not naive. I know what war does to men. My son taught me that. So we work with reality, not against it." Caleb looked at Lydia, uncertainty written across his face. She recognized the fear in his eyes, the fear of failing, of letting people down, of proving that he really was as broken as he feared. "What do you think?" he asked her quietly. "I think it's your decision," Lydia said. "But I also think that Storm is alive because of your skills. And if there are other horses out there that could benefit from what you know how to do, maybe that's worth the risk of sometimes having bad days." "Some days won't be bad," Caleb said. "Some days will be terrible, completely non-functional." "Then those days are terrible," Wade said with a shrug. "The horses aren't going anywhere. We work at the pace you can sustain, not the pace someone else thinks you should maintain." Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but steady. "I was at Cold River Canyon too. Different unit, but I was there. I know what that valley did to people." He met Caleb's eyes. "I get nightmares too. Can't handle crowds. Certain sounds still make me hit the ground. But I can still work, still contribute. It just looks different than it used to." The recognition that passed between them was immediate and profound. The understanding of shared trauma, shared struggle, shared survival. "All right," Caleb said, the word coming out rough and uncertain. "We can try. But I need to be clear. There will be days when I can't deliver, days when I'm useless." "Nobody's useless," Wade said firmly. "Some days you're just fighting different battles. We'll work around it." They shook hands, sealing an agreement that felt both terrifying and full of possibility. After Wade and Daniel left, Caleb stood in the yard looking shaken. "I just agreed to something I might not be able to do," he said. "No," Lydia corrected. "You agreed to try something that scares you. That's different." "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. And then you try again." She touched his arm. "Caleb, you've been failing at hiding from the world for 3 years. At least this way you're failing forward." He laughed despite himself, a sound that was becoming less rare, less rusty. "Failing forward. I like that." That night, Lydia moved from the barn into the cabin. It wasn't discussed or debated. She simply brought her bedroll inside and made a space for herself near the stove, and Caleb didn't protest. The arrangement was practical rather than romantic. The nights were getting cooler, and there was no sense in her freezing in the barn when there was space inside. But it changed something between them nonetheless. The forced intimacy of shared space, the domesticity of morning coffee and evening meals, the casual comfort of existing in proximity. All of it deepened the connection that had been building since Lydia first arrived. They developed routines. Caleb woke first, usually before dawn, and would sit with his coffee watching the sunrise through the cabin window. Lydia would wake to find him there, lost in thought, and would join him with her own cup. They'd sit in silence until the world was fully light, then begin the day's work. Storm continued to improve, gaining strength and trust in equal measure. By the end of the second week, the Mustang would eat from Caleb's hand and allow him to touch its neck and shoulders without flinching. Lydia watched these small victories accumulate, each one a testament to patience and persistence. One morning, she found Caleb in the corral with Storm, running his hands gently over the horse's back. The Mustang stood calmly, ears forward, accepting the touch. "First time anyone's done that," Caleb said when he noticed her watching. "First time Storm's let anyone touch its back." "What does it mean?" "Means trust. Means healing." He smiled, and Lydia was struck by how different he looked from the hollow-eyed man she'd found in the corner 6 weeks ago. He was still thin, still carrying obvious weight, but there was life in his face now, purpose. "You're good at this," she said. "Really good. It's easier with horses than people. Horses don't judge. They just respond to how you treat them." Maybe people could learn from that. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to examine too closely. Caleb cleared his throat and changed the subject. "Wade's bringing a horse tomorrow. Young gelding that got caught in wire. Needs someone to work with it, calm it down enough to treat the wounds. You ready for that?" "No." He was honest about it. "But I said I'd try, so I'll try." The gelding arrived the next morning, wild-eyed and terrified, blood crusted on its legs where the wire had cut deep. It was younger than Storm, less battle-hardened, and its fear manifested as pure panic. The moment Wade and Daniel tried to unload it from the trailer, it reared and screamed. Lydia saw Caleb go pale, saw his hands start to shake. The horse's screaming must have sounded too much like the screaming he remembered from the war. She moved to his side, not touching, just present. "You don't have to do this today," she said quietly. "Wade will understand." "No." Caleb's jaw was set. "If I back down every time something scares me, I'll never move forward." But he didn't move toward the horse. He stood frozen, trapped between intention and capability, while the gelding thrashed and fought against the lead rope. Wade looked over, saw the situation, and made a decision. "Daniel, take the lead, slow and steady. Caleb, you just watch today. Sometimes learning happens before doing." The permission to step back seemed to break whatever paralysis held Caleb. He nodded and moved to the fence, gripping it tightly as Daniel began the slow work of calming the panicked animal. Lydia stood beside Caleb, feeling the tension radiating from him. "I froze," he said, his voice barely audible. "I wanted to help, and I just froze." "You're still here," Lydia pointed out. "Still watching, still learning. That counts." "Does it?" "Yes." They watched Daniel work for over an hour, using techniques similar to what Caleb had used with Storm. Quiet voice, slow movements, no direct eye contact or threatening postures. Gradually, incrementally, the gelding's panic subsided into wary watchfulness. When Wade and Daniel finally left, promising to return in a few days to check progress, Caleb slumped against the fence. "I failed," he said flatly. "You showed up," Lydia countered. "You stayed. You watched. You learned. None of that is failure. I didn't do what I said I'd do. You did exactly what you were capable of doing today. Tomorrow might be different." But tomorrow wasn't different. The gelding remained in the far corral, untouched, while Caleb worked with Storm and avoided even looking at the newer arrival. The day after was the same. And the day after that. Lydia watched Caleb sink back into the darkness she'd worked so hard to pull him from. He stopped talking during meals, started spending more time alone. The nightmares intensified, his screams waking her multiple times each night. On the fourth day, she found him sitting in his old corner, knees drawn up, staring at nothing. "No," she said firmly. Absolutely not. You don't get to go back there. I can't do it, Lydia. His voice was hollow. I thought I could, but I can't. I'm still broken. Still useless. Stop it. She crouched in front of him. You had a setback. One setback. That doesn't erase everything you've accomplished. What have I accomplished? I hid in a corner for 3 years. You came and got me out. I worked for a few weeks, and now I'm right back where I started. That's not true, and you know it. Isn't it? He finally met her eyes, and the despair there made her heart ache. I can't even help a scared horse without falling apart. What good am I? Lydia took a deep breath, fighting her own frustration. You want to know what good you are? You saved Storm. You kept this ranch from completely falling apart. You stood up to men who came to mock you. You sat under the stars even though darkness terrifies you. You fought every single day to keep breathing when it would be easier to give up. That's what good you are. It's not enough. It's everything, she said fiercely. Caleb, I came here expecting to find someone who needed saving. But you don't need saving. You need time. You need patience. You need someone to stand with you while you figure out how to carry what you're carrying. And that's what I'm doing. But I can't do it if you won't meet me halfway. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You've been doing it. You just got scared and forgot. She sat down beside him, not pushing him out of the corner, but joining him in it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sit here for as long as you need, and then we're going to get up, and you're going to go look at that gelding. Just look, not touch, not work with it. Just acknowledge that it exists. And tomorrow, you'll look again, and the day after that, until looking doesn't scare you anymore. And then we'll take the next step. That could take weeks. Then it takes weeks. I'm not going anywhere. They sat in the corner together, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. Outside, the sun moved across the sky. The horses moved in their corrals. The prairie wind whispered through broken boards that still needed fixing. After a long while, Caleb stood up. He held out his hand to Lydia, pulled her to her feet, and together they walked to the window. From there, they could see the gelding pacing nervously in its corral. Tomorrow, Caleb said. I'll go look at it tomorrow. Okay, Lydia said. Tomorrow. But tomorrow came with its own crisis. Lydia woke to find Caleb already outside, standing at the gelding's corral, and her heart soared with hope. Then she saw his posture, rigid, trembling, hands clenched white on the fence rails, and realized he wasn't looking at the horse. He was somewhere else entirely, lost in whatever hell his mind had dragged him to. She approached carefully. Caleb? Where are you? The valley, he whispered. They're screaming. I can hear them screaming and I can't help. Can't reach them. They're dying and I'm just standing here. You're not in the valley. You're at the ranch. The war is over. It's never over. His voice broke. It's never over, Lydia. It just keeps happening, over and over, and I can't make it stop. The gelding, sensing the human's distress, began to pace more frantically, feeding off Caleb's fear. Lydia made a split-second decision. She climbed into the corral, putting herself between Caleb and the agitated horse. Hey, she said softly to the gelding. It's all right. Nobody's going to hurt you. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. She kept talking, using the techniques she'd watched Caleb and Daniel employ, moving slowly and deliberately. The gelding watched her with rolling eyes, but didn't bolt. Caleb, she said, not taking her eyes off the horse. I need you to come back. I need you here, right now. I can't. Yes, you can. Listen to my voice. Feel the fence under your hands. Smell the prairie air. Come back. It took several minutes, but gradually she saw awareness return to his eyes. He blinked, focused on her standing in the corral with the nervous horse, and panic of a different kind replaced the flashback. Lydia, get out of there. Only if you help me. She extended her hand. Come in here. Help me calm this animal down. I can't. You can. You have before. You're just scared and that's okay. But this horse needs you. I need you. So come in here and help me. The moment stretched impossibly long. Then Caleb moved, climbing over the fence with shaking hands, moving toward Lydia with steps that looked like they required every ounce of courage he possessed. Together, they stood with the gelding. Caleb's voice was unsteady as he began talking to the animal, but he was talking. He was present. He was trying. The horse gradually settled, responding to the familiar cadence of gentle words and patient presence. When they finally left the corral an hour later, both of them were exhausted and wrung out. But the gelding was calmer, and Caleb had faced his fear and survived. "I thought I was going to lose you back there," Lydia said as they sat on the cabin steps. "You almost did," Caleb rubbed his face. "The flashbacks are getting worse, not better, more frequent, more intense. Maybe that's part of healing. Maybe things get worse before they get better. Or maybe they just get worse." Lydia had no answer to that. She'd been operating on faith that persistence would pay off, that small steps forward would accumulate into real progress. But what if she was wrong? What if Caleb was one of the people who couldn't be helped, couldn't be healed, couldn't move past what had been done to them? She pushed the thought away. Not helpful. Not now. "Wade's coming tomorrow," she said instead, "to check on the gelding. I should tell him I can't do this, that he should find someone else." "Is that what you want?" Caleb considered the question seriously. "No. I want to be able to do this. I want to be useful. I want to prove that I'm more than just my trauma. But wanting something and being capable of it are different things. Then we keep trying until you're capable of it, or until you decide you don't want it anymore. But we don't quit because it's hard." "You're stubborn." "Yes," Lydia agreed. "And so are you, when you remember to be." That night, Caleb's nightmares were worse than ever. Lydia woke to his screaming and found him thrashing in his bedroll, completely unreachable. She didn't try to wake him, just sat nearby, keeping watch until the nightmare released him. When he finally woke, gasping and disoriented, she was there with water and a calm presence. "I can't keep putting you through this," he said hoarsely. "You're not putting me through anything. I'm choosing to be here." "Why?" The question was raw, desperate. Why would you choose this? Lydia thought about all the easy answers she could give: duty, compassion, stubbornness. But Caleb deserved the truth. "Because I see you," she said simply. "Not the mad cowboy, not the broken veteran, not the trauma or the fear. I see you, Caleb Archer, and I think you're worth standing beside, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days." Something in his expression cracked open, and for the first time since she'd known him, Caleb cried. Not the silent tears of frustration or despair, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of him. Lydia held him while he shook, offering no platitudes or promises, just presence. When the storm passed, he pulled back, wiping his face roughly. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "How to live with what I carry. How to be a person again." "Neither do I," Lydia admitted, "but maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together, one day at a time, and that's enough." Outside, the prairie night was vast and dark and full of possibilities, both terrifying and beautiful. Inside the cabin, two broken people sat together in the lamplight, not fixed, not whole, but no longer facing the darkness alone. And in that moment, it was enough. The morning after Caleb's breakdown arrived with unusual clarity, the kind of crystalline light that made everything seem sharper and more real. Lydia woke to find him already outside, not working but simply standing in the yard with his face turned toward the rising sun. There was something different about his posture, not the defeated slump she'd grown accustomed to, but not quite confidence either, something closer to acceptance. She made coffee and brought 2 cups outside, handing him one without speaking. They stood together watching the day brighten, and Lydia wondered if this was what peace looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone willing to stand with you through it. "I've been thinking," Caleb said finally, "about what you said last night, about figuring things out together. And I think I've been doing this wrong, trying to get back to who I was before, trying to be normal." He took a sip of coffee. "But that person doesn't exist anymore. The war killed him as surely as it killed the men who didn't come home. I need to stop mourning who I used to be and figure out who I am now." Lydia felt something shift in her chest, recognition of a truth she'd been circling around for months. "I think that's the wisest thing I've heard you say. Took me long enough to figure out." He turned to look at her. "I'm going to work with the gelding today. Really work with it, not just look at it. And if I have a flashback or fall apart, that's what happens. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." "What changed?" "You." The word was simple but weighted with meaning. "You keep showing up, keep standing with me, even when I give you every reason to leave. And I realize that if you can be that brave,
Maybe I can too. Before Lydia could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Wade and Daniel were arriving earlier than expected, and they weren't alone.
Behind them rode 3 other men, strangers to Lydia, leading horses in various states of distress. Wade dismounted with a grim expression. "Sorry to come unannounced, but we've got a situation. Storm last night spooked a whole herd. 6 horses ran through wire fencing trying to escape the lightning. These 3 are the worst hurt." He gestured to the animals being led forward. "The others we were able to treat on site, but these need more intensive care." Lydia saw Caleb's face go pale as he took in the extent of the injuries. Blood, torn flesh, animals in obvious pain and terror. This was more than the one-on-one work he'd been building toward. This was overwhelming, immediate, and urgent. "I can't," Caleb said, his voice already starting to shake. "Wade, I can't handle this many. I'm not ready." "I know it's a lot," Wade said, "but they'll die if we don't help them. And you're the only person within 50 miles who has the skill to do this." "Then they'll die." Caleb took a step backward. "Because I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't." Daniel moved forward, his quiet voice cutting through the rising panic. "Yes, you can. Not alone, but you're not alone. We'll help. Just tell us what to do." Lydia watched Caleb war with himself, fear and duty locked in terrible combat. She could see the exact moment he started to retreat into himself to find that dark corner where the world couldn't reach him. She stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Look at me. Just me. Not the horses, not the blood, not the crisis. Just me." His breathing was ragged, hands trembling. "Lydia, I can't do this. I know you're scared. I know this feels impossible, but those horses are going to die if you don't try." She gripped his arms. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up, one horse at a time, one wound at a time, and we'll be right here with you." "Well, what if I freeze? What if I have a flashback right in the middle of treating them?" "Then we'll handle it. Wade and Daniel and me. We'll step in and you'll step back, and that's okay. But Caleb, you have to try. Because right now, in this moment, you're the only chance these animals have." The weight of that responsibility seemed to crush him. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of collapsing under it, Caleb straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice unsteady but determined. "All right, we'll need to separate them. Can't treat them all at once. Which one's worst?" Wade pointed to a bay mare whose front legs were shredded, bone visible through torn flesh. "That one probably won't make it even with treatment, but she deserves a chance. Bring her to the main corral. The gelding we can move to the far pasture for now." Caleb was already moving, shifting into the focused competence Lydia had seen when he worked with Storm. "Daniel, I need you to gather every clean cloth we have. Lydia, start heating water, lots of it. Wade, help me get her secured where I can work." They moved like a military unit responding to orders, each person knowing their role. The bay mare fought as they led her into the corral, her pain making her dangerous and unpredictable. Caleb approached slowly, hands visible, voice steady despite the tremor Lydia could still hear underneath. "Easy, girl, huh?" he murmured. "I know you're hurting, I know you're scared, but we're going to help you. Just need you to trust us for a little while." The mare's eyes rolled white with terror, but Caleb kept talking, kept moving with that deliberate gentleness that seemed to calm even the most panicked animals. When his hand finally touched her neck, the horse flinched but didn't bolt. "Good. That's good." Caleb ran his hands carefully down her injured legs, assessing the damage. When he looked up, his face was grim. "It's bad, really bad, but I think we can save her if we work fast." What followed was the most intense 3 hours of Lydia's life. Caleb worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, cleaning wounds with steady hands despite the sweat that poured down his face and the trembling that never quite stopped. He talked constantly, to the mare, to himself, to the ghosts only he could see, a stream of consciousness that kept him anchored in the present. Twice he had to stop, hands shaking too badly to continue, and Wade or Daniel would step in while Caleb stepped back, breathing hard, fighting to stay present. But he didn't disappear into flashbacks, didn't retreat to dark corners. He stayed, riding the edge of his capability, pushing just slightly beyond what he thought he could handle. When the mare was finally bandaged and resting quietly in the corral, they moved to the second horse, a young stallion with wire cuts across its chest and shoulders. Then the third, a paint with injuries on its haunches and back legs. By the time the sun reached its zenith, all 3 horses were treated and secured. Caleb sat in the dirt, covered in blood and sweat, looking like he'd fought a war, which, Lydia supposed, he had. Wade crouched beside him. "You did it. All 3 are going to make it because of you." "We did it," Caleb corrected, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Maybe not, but you showed up when it mattered. That's what counts." After Wade and Daniel left, promising to return the next day to check on the horses, Caleb sat on the corral fence, staring at the 3 injured animals now resting in separate pens. Lydia climbed up beside him, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "You were amazing," she said. "I was terrified the entire time." "I know. That's what made it amazing." Caleb turned to look at her, really look at her, and Lydia saw something new in his expression. Not just gratitude or friendship, but something deeper. Something that made her heart skip in a way she hadn't felt since Samuel was alive. "I couldn't have done that without you," he said quietly. "Not just today. Any of this. I'd be dead in that cabin if you hadn't refused to give up on me. You're not giving me enough credit for being stubborn." "I'm serious, Lydia." He took her hand, and the touch sent warmth up her arm. "You saved my life, not by pulling me out of that corner, but by standing with me while I learned to pull myself out, by making me believe I was worth the effort." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "You were always worth the effort, Caleb. You just couldn't see it." "I'm starting to see it now. Not clearly, not all the time, but sometimes, like today, I catch glimpses of who I might become. And it's because of you." The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility. Then Caleb pulled back, releasing her hand, and the spell broke. "I should check on the horses," he said, climbing down from the fence. Lydia watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch, and wondered what she was feeling. She'd come here to help a neighbor, to give herself purpose after Samuel's death. When had it become something more? The following weeks brought a rhythm to their lives that was both exhausting and exhilarating. The 3 storm-injured horses required constant care, and Caleb threw himself into the work with an intensity that worried Lydia even as it impressed her. He was up before dawn and worked until well after dark, sleeping fitfully and eating only when she forced food in front of him. But he was also healing. The nightmares didn't stop, but they became less frequent. The flashbacks still came, but he developed strategies for managing them, stepping away, breathing through them, letting them pass without fighting. He was learning to live with his trauma rather than being consumed by it. Word of what he'd accomplished spread through the territory. People who'd written him off as the mad cowboy started showing up with injured or difficult horses, asking for his help. Some came with genuine need. Others came out of curiosity, wanting to see if the rumors were true. Caleb handled both with the same quiet competence, though Lydia could see the toll it took. He was pushing himself too hard, trying to prove something to the world, or maybe just to himself. One evening, about 6 weeks after the storm-injured horses arrived, Lydia found him sitting alone in the dark barn, his head in his hands. "The bay mare died," he said without looking up. "The one we treated first. She seemed like she was healing, and then she just gave up, laid down and died." Lydia sat beside him in the darkness. "I'm sorry. I did everything right, cleaned the wounds properly, changed the bandages, gave her medicine, everything." His voice was thick with frustration and grief. "But it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. You gave her a chance, Caleb. That's all anyone can do." "Is it?" He finally looked at her, his face ravaged in the dim light. "Because it feels like I keep giving chances and watching them fail. The mayor died. Half the men in my unit died. Everyone I try to help ends up worse off than when they started." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Look at you, Lydia. You came here to help me, and now you're trapped on this ranch, working yourself to exhaustion, dealing with my nightmares and flashbacks. I've ruined your life as surely as I ruin everything else I touch." The words hung in the air, bitter and self-defeating. Lydia felt anger flare in her chest. "Stop it," she said sharply. "Stop making decisions for me about what my life should be. I'm here because I choose to be here. Not because I'm trapped, not because I pity you, but because this is where I want to be. Why would you want this?" "Because this matters." Her voice rose. "Because helping you matters. Helping these horses matters. Building something real matters. After Samuel died, I spent 2 years going through the motions, pretending to live while feeling dead inside. Being here, working with you, it's the first time I've felt alive since I lost him." Caleb stared at her, stunned. "What are you saying?" Lydia took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm saying that you didn't ruin my life. You gave it back to me. And yes, the mayor died, and that's tragic. But Storm is alive. The gelding is alive. Those other 2 horses are healing. You've made a difference, Caleb, whether you can see it or not." "I don't know how to believe that." "Then trust me to believe it for both of us until you can believe it yourself." They sat in the darkness of the barn, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, and something fundamental shifted between them. The air felt charged with possibility, with unspoken words that hovered just beyond articulation. Caleb reached out and took her hand again, and this time he didn't let go. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I don't know when it started or how to stop it or if I even want to stop it. But there it is." Lydia's heart hammered in her chest. She'd known, on some level, that her feelings had evolved beyond friendship. But hearing Caleb voice it made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. "I think I've been falling for you too," she admitted. "But Caleb, we need to be careful. You're still healing. I'm still grieving Samuel. We can't build something real on broken foundations." "What if we're not building on broken foundations? What if we're building something new out of the broken pieces?" He squeezed her hand. "I'm not saying we rush into anything. I'm just saying I see a future now. For the first time since the war, I can imagine tomorrow and the day after that, and maybe even next year. And you're in all of those tomorrows, Lydia. I want you to be." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I want that too. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of losing someone again. Of building a life with you and then having the war take you away even though it's over. Of your demons winning in the end." "They might," Caleb said honestly. "I can't promise you I'll be cured or fixed or normal. The nightmares might never stop. I might always be someone who jumps at loud noises and can't handle crowds. Is that something you can live with?" Lydia thought about it seriously, giving the question the weight it deserved. Could she spend her life with someone who might always struggle, who might have bad days or weeks or months, who would never be the easy, uncomplicated partner that other women had? "Yes," she said finally, "because everyone's broken in some way. You just wear your breaks on the outside where people can see them, and I'd rather be with someone honest about their damage than someone who pretends to be whole." Caleb pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, horse and sweat and something uniquely his own. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in the quiet darkness. The next morning brought Wade Holloway and a surprise. Behind him rode a wagon driven by a well-dressed man Lydia didn't recognize. "This is Marcus Brennan," Wade said, gesturing to the stranger. "No relation to our marshal. He runs a horse breeding operation 2 territories over. Heard about what you've been doing here and wanted to meet you." Marcus dismounted with the ease of someone born to wealth and horses. He was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He walked through the corrals, examining each horse with the practiced gaze of an expert. "Impressive," he said finally. "The care you've given these animals is exceptional, especially considering their injuries when they arrived." "Thank you," Caleb said warily. "What can I do for you, Mr. Brennan?" "I want to offer you a position. I run the largest horse operation in 3 territories. We breed, train, and sell quality animals to buyers across the West. I could use someone with your skills on my staff." Lydia felt her stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Caleb needed. Legitimate work, good pay, recognition of his abilities. But it would mean leaving the ranch, leaving her. She saw Caleb's face carefully neutral as he considered the offer. "What would the position entail?" "You'd work with our difficult horses, the ones that are too wild or too damaged for normal training methods. We get animals from all over, some mistreated, some just naturally high-strung. They need someone with patience and skill." Marcus named a salary that made Lydia's eyes widen. "You'd have housing on the property, full access to our facilities, and staff to assist you." It was everything Caleb should want. Stability, respect, a chance to leave his past behind and start fresh somewhere people didn't know him as the Mad Cowboy. "I appreciate the offer," Caleb said slowly, "but I'll have to decline." Marcus looked surprised. "May I ask why? This is an excellent opportunity." "It is, but my life is here." Caleb glanced at Lydia. The ranch, the work I'm building with Wade, the people I care about. I'm not interested in starting over somewhere else. I'd rather build something here. After Marcus left, clearly disappointed but respectful of the decision, Wade let out a low whistle. That was a lot of money to turn down. Money's not everything, Caleb said. Besides, I've got plans for this place. What kind of plans? Lydia asked. Caleb walked to a clearing beyond the main corral, rich soil that had once been part of the original homestead. I want to plant an orchard here. Apple trees, maybe. Something that takes years to grow but lasts long after we're gone. The "we" hung in the air, deliberate and weighted with meaning. An orchard, Lydia repeated softly. That's a long-term commitment. I know, but I'm ready to think long-term now. He turned to face her. I'm ready to build a future instead of just surviving the present. Wade cleared his throat. I'll just leave you two alone to discuss orchards. He climbed back on his horse with a knowing smile. After he left, Lydia and Caleb stood in the clearing, looking at the empty soil that held so much possibility. If we plant apple trees, Lydia said carefully, it'll be years before they bear fruit. Years of watering and tending and protecting them from frost and drought and everything else that can go wrong. I know, and there's no guarantee they'll survive. We could do everything right and still lose them. I know that too. Caleb took her hands. But that's life, isn't it? You plant something and tend it and hope it grows. And even if it doesn't, at least you tried. At least you chose to believe in tomorrow. Lydia felt tears blur her vision. When did you get so wise? When I met a widow stubborn enough to refuse to let me give up on myself. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement. Lydia answered by wrapping her arms around him, deepening the kiss, choosing in that moment to stop protecting her heart and start living again. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. What? I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait, but I don't want to wait anymore, Lydia. I've spent 3 years waiting to feel better, waiting to be normal, waiting for my life to start again. I'm done waiting. Marry me. Help me plant that orchard. Build this life with me. Lydia's mind raced. It was too soon. They'd only known each other a few months. He was still healing. She was still grieving. Every practical, sensible part of her brain screamed that this was reckless. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Because sometimes the sensible thing and the right thing weren't the same. Sometimes you had to take a leap of faith and trust that you'd either land safely or learn to fly on the way down. They were married 3 weeks later by a traveling judge, with Wade and Daniel as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony on the ranch, no fancy dress or elaborate celebration, just two people choosing each other in the face of everything that should have kept them apart. Red Mesa's response was mixed. Some folks thought it was scandalous, a widow marrying the mad cowboy so quickly. Others saw it as practical, two broken people finding usefulness in each other. A few, like Doc Winters, saw it for what it really was. Two survivors building something real from the wreckage of their past. The first year was harder than either of them expected. Caleb still had nightmares, still struggled with crowds and loud noises, still had days when the weight of his past made it hard to get out of bed. But now Lydia was there, not just as a helper, but as a partner, sharing the burden and the victories in equal measure. They planted the apple orchard in early spring, 30 young trees in neat rows. It would be 5 years before they bore fruit, but Caleb tended them with the same patience he showed the horses, talking to them as he watered, encouraging their growth. The horse healing work expanded slowly but steadily. Wade brought in a steady stream of animals that needed help, and Caleb developed a reputation for being able to calm the uncalmable, heal the unhealable. He trained Daniel in his methods, and eventually they brought on 2 more helpers, young men from Red Mesa looking for honest work. Storm, the Mustang that had crashed through the fence all those months ago, became Caleb's personal mount. The wild animal that no one thought could be tamed now responded to the lightest touch, moving as if it could read Caleb's thoughts. They were perfect for each other, 2 creatures who'd been written off as too damaged and proved everyone wrong. 2 years after they married, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified both of them. Caleb because he worried about passing his trauma to a child. Lydia because she'd already lost so much and couldn't bear to lose again. But when their daughter was born on a cool October morning, healthy and loud and perfect, something in both of them healed just a little bit more. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented, proof that beautiful things could come from broken people, that life moved forward even when the past tried to drag you back. 3 years later came a son, Samuel, named for the husband Lydia had lost but would never forget. Caleb understood that carrying the past didn't mean being trapped by it, and he honored her grief the same way she honored his. The orchard finally bore fruit in the 6th year, just as Caleb had predicted. The apples were sweet and tart and perfect, and they harvested them together, Caleb and Lydia and their 2 children, filling baskets under the autumn sun. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house watching Hope and Samuel play in the yard, Caleb took Lydia's hand. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "What's that?" "I can't remember the last time I had a nightmare, or the last time I had a flashback." He paused, considering. "The trauma's still there, probably always will be, but it doesn't own me anymore." Lydia squeezed his hand. "When did that happen?" "I don't know. Gradually, I think, little by little, day by day, until one day I woke up and realized I was thinking about the future more than the past. That tomorrow excited me more than yesterday haunted me." "And what does tomorrow look like?" Caleb gestured to the orchard, the corrals full of healing horses, the children playing in the last light of day. "It looks like this, exactly like this." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. The land that had once felt like a prison now felt like home. The man who'd been broken beyond repair had found a way to carry his scars and still build a life worth living. And the widow who'd shown up refusing to walk away from a broken soul had found her own healing in the process of helping him find his. The ranch thrived, the horses healed, the children grew. And 2 people who'd been given every reason to give up on themselves and each other proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to hope, even when hope seems impossible. Years later, when people asked Caleb about his time in the war, he would tell them honestly about the trauma, the pain, the men he'd lost. But he would also tell them about the ranch, about the stubborn widow who refused to let him disappear, about the horses that taught him patience, about the orchard that taught him faith in tomorrow. And when they asked him if he'd recovered from the war, he would smile and say no. Because recovery implied going back to who he was before, and that person was gone forever. Instead, he'd become someone new, someone shaped by trauma, but not defined by it. Someone who carried the past, but wasn't imprisoned by it. Someone who'd learned that broken things could still be beautiful if you gave them time and care and refused to give up. The mad cowboy was gone. In his place stood a man who'd faced the darkness and found his way back to the light, not alone but hand in hand with someone brave enough to walk beside him through hell and patient enough to help him find his way home. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, vast and indifferent as ever. But on this small piece of land, 2 people had carved out something precious, a life built not on perfection, but on persistence, not on being whole, but on being willing to try, not on erasing the past, but on refusing to let it steal the future. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.